I'm Matt Bortz.
I'm Catherine Early.
And I'm Adam Pritchard.
And I'm Garrett Kruger.
And I'm Sabrina Ricci, and we're from the I Know Dino podcast.
And this is Pastime. Paleontology is really a science that captures the interests of the entire world. In every corner of the planet, there are groups of people that are inspired and interested to learn about natural history and the fossil record. All kinds of different people around the globe, all age groups, genders, cultural backgrounds, languages, and as with a lot of other scientific disciplines, industries, and, fandoms, there are big conferences where paleontologists gather to talk about the latest and greatest findings in the fossil record. And if you're into the fossil record of backboned animals, there is no better place to gather than at the annual meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology. At this annual conference, thousands of students, professors, amateurs, and excited novices come together to learn about what is new in vertebrate paleontology. Matt has been going to these meetings for a long time, over a decade at this point. He's kind of old now. Catherine and I have been going for a little less than that, but at this point it's kind of like a family reunion, meeting up with a whole bunch of old friends and making some new ones. So while we're hanging out at the end of conference banquet, just chatting about completely unrelated things, who should come to our table but two other paleo-podcasters? I'm guessing you guys know that there are indeed other podcasts that talk about natural history, but nevertheless, I think it's well worth it to introduce our friends. From the I Know Dino podcast, Garrett Kruger and Sabrina Ricci. How did you get into paleontology to the point where you were like, we need to make a podcast about this?
That's a good question. So let's see. So Sabrina and I met in college. And then we didn't realize that we both like dinosaurs.
3 years into dating.
Yeah, way later.
Well, you were not having the important discussions in that relationship.
We really were.
We got there, but
I don't think we even realized it until we were living in New Jersey at the time, when we went to the American Museum of Natural History, and we were like, "Oh, I really like dinosaurs. You really like dinosaurs. We should do some dinosaur stuff together." And then we didn't do that much. We kind of started a website, and you
started a map of museums.
Yes, because our favorite thing was dinosaur museums, and we're like, we need a map of every dinosaur museum that there is. And so we made one, but it definitely didn't have every museum, because we're still finding them all the time. I think we're up to maybe 160 on that map, because we have continued adding to it.
There's so many.
Is that on the I Know Dino website?
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Oh, awesome.
And then we didn't really do much with it for a couple of years.
Well, then we had a dinosaur-themed wedding.
Yes.
As you do, at a zoo.
With a guy in a T-Rex costume.
Yeah.
The real one, not the inflatable one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like a 20-foot.
Wait, what does the real one mean?
Really heavy. You can only be in that suit maybe 20 minutes at a time.
Like Walking with Dinosaurs arena kind of.
Animatronic.
Oh, okay.
Face.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had to... It was the first year that they had this dinosaur. They called him Duncan. And they had to change his face to look like it was smiling more, because apparently it was frightening the kids.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And while we were planning our wedding, they had this long list of things you could include. It was like, oh, you could pay a little bit more and we'll keep the train running around the zoo and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, we also have this dinosaur. Would you guys want to do that? We don't have it on the list because, no one would ever want this at a wedding, but maybe you guys would. Yes. Yeah. So we did that. And then 3 months later, we decided to start the podcast, mostly because there weren't any other dinosaur specific podcasts, kind of like we were talking about earlier on, which show was that?
On our show.
Yeah. Like we talked about on our show, where we were saying you guys started partly your paleontology podcast because there are so few of them. And yeah, so same sort of story for us.
Just dinosaur specific.
Yeah. And then we've just been learning more and more about dinosaurs ever since.
Garrett and Sabrina are very dedicated to their work on science education through I Know Dino. It's a very different kind of podcast to pastime, which is really cool. They feature more of a long-form discussion about the new and notable discoveries in paleontology. They also do a lot of interviews with researchers on those new discoveries. And each episode is entitled based on their Dino of the Day, from the most famous to the very obscurest of dinosaurs. I Know Dino is not just a podcast. There's also sort of written component to it that has been featured in blog posts and actually in published books. Almost sort of a prehistorical fiction. So guys, how did you hear that the SVP meeting was actually a thing?
We kind of heard about it by doing this podcast, but we assumed that you had to be a professional paleontologist to go, so we never thought of it. Yeah. And then we had an opportunity to take a road trip to Alberta and Montana, and so we stopped at as many museums. We went to the Museum of the Rockies, and we met with John Scannella, and this was maybe a couple months before SVP in Salt Lake City. And he's like, "Yo, you guys are going to SVP, right? What? We can go?"
And we did.
So yeah, we...
John Scannella is a curator of paleontology at the Museum of the Rockies. He's most famous for his extensive work on the history of Triceratops, including the hypothesis that the long-frilled horned dinosaur Torosaurus is actually just the fully grown adult version of Triceratops.
Yeah, it's a really good point for our listeners. A lot of times, scientific conferences and academic conferences are open to anyone who wants to attend. You just have to pay money.
Yeah.
You have to pay the same registration fee. You know, it is like a little bit higher if you're not registered as a student in the field. But if you want to go to a conference and learn about something you're interested in, you can usually, if you have the money, find a way to access it.
Well, it's true that SVP is open to the general public and pretty much anyone who registers for the meeting. Registration costs quite a bit of money, and that can be very prohibitive for a lot of potential attendees. If you're a student who's really interested in coming to SVP, but you're concerned about those costs, send an email to SVP leadership about travel grants that could support your trip to the meeting.
Well, my favorite thing about it was I guess we had been doing the podcast for about 10 months by then, and I'd just been slogging through research papers, sort of trying to learn these various words and piece together the current state of paleontology, 1 week at a time. And then you go to SVP and the guy or the man or woman just stands up in front of you and for 15 minutes explains everything to you. And you don't have to really try to piece it together at all. They do all the hard work right there for you. And it was wonderful. So I just was a sponge for the first SVP, and there were tons of things that I didn't even know about that are really common knowledge to most paleontologists. And then the second SVP was a little bit less, and by the third SVP, I think I was pretty well caught up. So it was more like just getting the new stuff.
I think the first SVP too. By the time we went, we knew enough to know who the more famous paleontologists might be, and then when we saw them, kind of. For lack of a better term, fanboyed.
Yeah, we did a lot of that, that's for sure.
One thing I think that's important to kind of just describe for listeners is SVP is one of the key features of it is going in there and getting direct from the scientists who are working on specific ideas or projects, those snippets of new information, new fossils, new species, new analyses. And I would say, and let me know if you guys agree or disagree, there are always like 2 or 3, maybe a few more talks or presentations period that are, wait, what? Presentations, just things that are so out of left field or bizarre or shocking that you're just kind of staring at the fossils or whoever's giving the talk, just kind of open-mouthed and confused because your mind has just to some degree been blown.
I think it's important now to just chat about like SVP 2018, Albuquerque, New Mexico, green chili, lots of enchiladas. My gut is still recovering. It was a really exciting meeting. But let's go around this digital room that we're podcasting from and talk about our favorite moments. this year?
So I think, yeah, the best one, or at least the most exciting and awe-striking, was the lungs.
Yeah, with Jingmei.
Yeah, Jingmei O'Connor. So she basically found a, sort of bird-ish dinosaur. I think it was an enantiornithine. And they were looking at it, and she's, looking at the fossil, and it's like, oh, okay, there's the gastroliths, seen those before. And then she looks up a little bit, and it's like, there's two lobes there that look kind of lung-ish. And then, flash forward to getting a lung expert to come and take a look at them, and it's like, yeah, that looks like lung tissue when you look at it under powerful magnification. And so it appears to be the first evidence of fossilized dinosaur lung that's ever been seen.
We got to talk to her and interview her at SVP, so she's on our show.
The discovery of those fossilized lungs was published in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and the project was led by Xiaoli Wang of Linyi University in Shandong, China. If I might offer my thoughts on my favorite moments of the meeting, there were really two things that stuck out to me. One was an amazing specimen that was part of a conference talk, and one was actually a whole session of paleontologists talking about one particular subject.
So this was a talk by Mark Goodwin about some amazing specimens of the sort of the flat-headed pachycephalosaur from the Hell Creek Formation, addressing the question of whether those are sort of an early growth stage of what will become the big dome-headed Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch. But they're exceptional specimens, not just because they're flat heads with giant horns sticking out the back of their skulls, but also that they've got some of the most complete jaw material of any Pachycephalosaur, and they've got crazy, kind of almost theropod-looking teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very weird for an ornithischian dinosaur. And it's just, as far as I know, there are 0 complete skeletons of Pachycephalosaur on Earth. So any pieces of those to me is always a little on the mind-blowing side.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I thought was interesting about that was somebody asked him, like, how do you account for like this horn loss that we don't see in any extant animals? And he basically said, like, well, dinosaurs do weird things as they age. So I really want to see someone like dive into that.
So Adam, would you say that was your favorite talk of the conference?
Oh, golly. I'd say it might have been my favorite sort of individual moment, the sort of wait, what moment.
Yeah.
But for me, the most interesting part of the conference was a whole symposium. So at SVP, there are almost, in addition to just kind of regular sessions, like you'll have a session going about mammals and a session going about fishes and a session going about fossil preparation. But sometimes a couple paleontologists will get together and kind of try and develop a single symposium, a series of conference talks that are focused on some specific question in the evolution of vertebrates. And my favorite this year was a symposium focused on the early evolution and kind of the ecology of crocodiles and their fossil relatives. And there was just a whole series of talks on interpreting the fossil record of crocs and just seeing how their ecology changed through time, from terrestrial land-dwelling animals to aquatic ones. There were talks on the biology of modern crocodiles, emphasizing like we don't know some basic things about how modern crocodiles live, like how much strain can the kind of the chin, the point between the two jawbones, take before it breaks, or how does the femur, the thigh bone, actually move when the croc is walking inside of its hip joint, and how crocs. Another thing, modern crocs have these little facial sensory organs that are situated one to each scale all over the snout, and we don't know basic things like what nerves provide to those. Can we see like evidence of those sensory organs just from the holes on the skull? And for me, that was a great session because it brought together all the paleo research that's going into like diversity of croc, which in the fossil record just basically, although the Cenozoic examples by and large are the semi-aquatic ambush predators that we see today, in the Mesozoic, they just kind of did whatever they wanted as long as dinosaurs weren't doing it slightly better. But then we had all this talk on the biology of the modern animals, just showing that basically people who are primarily paleontologists really have to delve into questions about how living things are put together and how they function in order to answer questions about what the heck fossil animals are doing in the first place.
All right, Matt, what were your favorite moments?
My two favorite moments were one was there was a really fascinating talk that focused on Natural Trap Cave, which is a site in Wyoming that's basically a pit in the ground that's been collecting animals that weren't watching where they were going for a very long time. And some of those animals that weren't watching where they're going were the American cheetah, which is an animal, Miras sinonyx. And the American cheetah is an animal that is probably more closely related to mountain lions than it is to a cheetah, but it's built in a very similar way. It's a very fast-moving animal. And one of the questions that people have had for a very long time is that we have a living animal in North America today that is one of the fastest animals on the planet, and that is the pronghorn antelope. Like, the pronghorn antelope moves at a rate that no wolf can catch it, no mountain lion can catch it. Like, there's no reason for it to be so good at running. Maybe the pronghorn antelope evolved this ability to run really, really fast and really efficiently because it evolved in a landscape that had the American cheetah on it. And so at Natural Trap Cave, they went in and using the isotopes that are preserved in the bones of different kinds of prey animals and the isotopes that are preserved in different predator animals, they were able to reconstruct this ancient food web that was part of the Western North American landscape. And what they discovered is that animals like horses and relatives of cows were animals that were being eaten by all kinds of predators, things like the cheetah, but also wolves and bears seem to be scavenging them. But the pronghorn antelope seems to mostly align with the isotopes we find in the American cheetah. And so they were actually able to connect the behavior that we can see from the morphology. We can see both these animals move really quickly, and then use the structure of the interior of their bone using geochemical techniques to actually figure out that, yes, the American cheetah seems to be an animal that did eat pronghorn antelopes. And this might be a way to explain why the pronghorn antelope is like the second fastest animal on the planet. And it just like seeing that come together was just such a beautiful paleontological story. Like everything was kind of like going in the same direction. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And also I love everything about the fact that the American cheetah exists.
Yeah, that's actually really similar to one of my favorite talks too, which was trying to answer the question of whether or not raptors, I'm using raptors in kind of air quotes, specifically Deinonychus, hunted in packs. And they, again, looked at something kind of similar. They looked at isotopes of carbon in their fossils, compared to what was presumably one of their main prey sources, Tenontosaurus, and also sort of how Deinonychus isotopes changed over time. And basically they found that they changed significantly over time, which indicates they probably didn't hunt in large groups, because animals that hunt in groups tend to eat the same things together and tend to do it throughout their lifespan. So it was kind of like a little bit of a piece of evidence towards the Jurassic Park version of raptors, not being so accurate.
Oh,
So-
interesting.
So effectively, it was the younger Deinonychus specimens that we have don't show evidence of consuming the same things as the large adults.
Exactly. Yeah.
Man, I love
That's awesome.
that is one of the things that blows my mind about the Mesozoic. That that's a really cool research study. I'm excited to learn more about that. Like the idea that dinosaurs, so often we compare dinosaurs to mammals. When we think about the Morrison Formation, where we find things like Allosaurus and Stegosaurus, we think about them as if it's just like the Serengeti with things. But the way that dinosaurs grew up was so fundamentally different than the way mammals do it. That you hatch from a little egg and you're a little animal, and you already have teeth in your head, and feed yourself in a way that like little alligators have to do something different than what mom does because they just can't eat the same food. And eventually, if they survive and they get big enough, then they can do that. But the idea that every dinosaur represents like a whole fauna of animals, that you have like a baby meat eater like a raptor is going to be hatched as like a little carnivorous lizard. And then it's going to grow up and become like a coyote. And then as it gets a little bit bigger, it becomes a wolf. And then as it gets bigger, it becomes a lion. Shows why the Mesozoic was such a crazy and fascinating time. Like the rules were totally different.
Catherine, what did you enjoy?
The bird session was pretty great as always, but I guess that's a bit of an obvious answer coming from me. One thing that I was really excited to see was something that I co-organized. We had a diversity and paleontology luncheon this year for the first time that I'm aware of. My co-organizers and I, so Rebecca Hunt Foster, who is the lead paleontologist, like the site paleontologist for Dinosaur National Monument now, and Dr. Ashley Morehart, who is on the faculty at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. We volunteered to do these Women in Paleo events a couple years ago, but this year we wanted to branch out because, you know, there is a lot to be said for the importance of focusing on all of the groups that are underrepresented in paleontology and science. Women are certainly underrepresented at the higher professional levels in our society, but there are a lot of other groups that are present in our membership and in paleontology, but not in great numbers. And when you're a member of an underrepresented group, there's certain challenges that you face that you don't if you're part of the majority. And so we wanted to expand the focus of this group out to include lots of underrepresented groups, however those might be defined. We wanted everyone to feel welcome, so this year we expanded it to diversity and paleontology. We had, I think, 10 different discussions led by different discussion leaders. So one of the topics was the mental health crisis in academia. Another topic was being a person of color in paleontology. We had a Women in Paleontology table as well, working with physical disabilities in a fieldwork-based science. And so lots of different topics, and it was kind of a free-flow discussion. So people would start at one table and then after 15 minutes maybe rotate, or in some cases like the table dealing with mental health, I think some people just stayed there the entire time. It was an hour-long event, and it looked like there were some really meaningful conversations happening throughout the room. So I was really excited to see that happen. And so that'll be something that we hopefully see continuing on in the future. The other thing that I really liked about SVP this year was seeing Dr. Kay Berensmeyer win the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society. She is an amazing researcher who has been doing actualistic taphonomy experiments. So that means she looks at modern day animals and how their remains go from being like carcasses to bones, and how those bones might be scattered, to better understand what we can tell from the fossil record when we see bones disarticulated, you know, like spread out in a certain way, or see certain marks on the bones. So she's been doing this at a field site in Kenya for over 40 consecutive years, which is a very long time, especially for, if you think about women in paleontology being underrepresented now. When she would have started it over 40 years ago, that was extremely uncommon. She also does a lot of interesting work with looking at human evolution as well. So it was really cool to see her get awarded that much-deserved honor.
She gave a talk at the first SVP we went to, I remember, about, and it was...
Oh, yeah, that was a great one.
Yeah.
It was, again, about taphonomy, and, like, she was like, everybody just throws away the sort of articulation of dinosaurs if they've moved at all. She's like, you can't learn anything by them because they moved slightly. She's like, there might still be valuable information in there. And she gave all these examples of, like, real-world studies where it's like, I threw all these bones in a river and then saw how far they moved, and it was that was really great.
Garrett, Sabrina, you've been going to SVP now for 3 years. What do you think of it?
You've been coming to SVP for 3 years now. What is kind of like, you know, what's kind of the feel that you take away from it at the end of the meeting now?
Mostly exhaustion, I would say.
But also, like, really happy and feeling, like you said, at some point it turns into like seeing family and friends, and it becomes a thing like, oh, I'm really glad I got to see this person again this year.
Yeah. And also like the amount of knowledge, and usually we do several interviews and set up a lot more interviews to be done. So like a lot of excitement around that kind of stuff too.
You walk away with the same kind of exhaustion and intellectual excitement that any professional, like or professor or student, walks away with as well.
Well, Garrett, Sabrina, thank you for joining in on the fun. You can find I Know Dino through iTunes, Facebook, Twitter, and the official iknowdino.com website. They also provide exclusive content to backers of the podcast on Patreon. And for my usual spiel, for more of Pastime, please follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Pastime Paleo, visit the website pastime.org, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, please leave reviews, it's a great way for people to actually find out that we exist, and also subscribe to the official Pastime Paleo YouTube channel. I've gradually been uploading the past episodes as one gigantic playlist, so if you really feel like binging all of Pastime in one sitting, and honestly, why wouldn't you? You can do it through our YouTube channel. And we'll see you next time on Pastime.